Welcome back. This time we're talking about Timeless, Season 1, Episode 11, The World's Columbian Exposition. As with my last review, this one's pretty late, but it's only a week behind, and hopefully this will be online before the next episode actually airs. Meaning for the first time in over a month, I'll be caught up with my Timeless reviews. Now, this episode was the first one of the second half of the season and picks up right after the cliffhanger that we found ourselves at the end of the Benedict Arnold episode. By that I mean Lucy has been captured by Flynn, leaving Rufus and Wyatt to return to the present without her. And when they return to home base, it's quickly apparent that pretty much nothing has changed because of what happened at the Rittenhouse estate at the end of the last episode. In fact, when we jump over to see Lucy, who's still being held hostage by Flynn, we find him returning back from the past, where apparently he had tried to lead a second mission to kill John Rittenhouse, Rittenhouse's son. They were, however, repelled by 50 muskets, as he describes it. And he laments the fact that his family's still dead and Rittenhouse is still in power, and for this he blames Lucy. Convinced that if he had been able to kill Rittenhouse's son, Rittenhouse, the organization, would never have formed as it did. Lucy counters that Rittenhouse must have had enough followers at that point that even if Flynn had been able to kill John, the organization probably still would have survived. So Flynn comes up with the idea of doing a Terminator 2 and finding John later in life and killing him then. Unfortunately, Lucy can't find any record of him, and this only makes Flynn even angrier at Lucy. Up to this point, they were definitely adversaries, but at least on the part of Flynn, he saw her as a future ally because, according to her notebook, she sooner or later joins him. But now that doesn't really matter to him as much because he really does sort of hate Lucy because she, in his mind, kept him from saving his family. So instead of him actually destroying Rittenhouse at its root, he's back to what he was doing, which was trying to take out as many of its operatives throughout history as he can. As we see him try to do in this episode as he sets out to kill Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and J.P. Morgan. And that brings me to one of my biggest disappointments with this episode. By the end, I found it an enjoyable episode. I enjoyed the additions of Harry Houdini and H.H. Holmes. I thought those were both good arcs. But as sort of an anthology episode building off the cliffhanger we got in the Benedict Arnold episode, which sort of promised us the first big dent to the Rittenhouse organization, this episode was sort of a letdown because we see no major changes to present day, not only to Rittenhouse because it lost its founder, but in any other aspect that we've noticed thus far, combined with the setback to Flynn, where he's basically back to what he'd been doing in every other episode up until the Benedict Arnold one. It just really felt more like a reset button than anything else, and it really just didn't live up to the hype that we were kind of promised in the previous episode. As far as the main plot of this episode, again, Flynn is trying to kill a trio of people he says belong to Rittenhouse. And to do this, he needs to get into a secure room, and he needs Lucy's help to do it, tricking Rufus and Wyatt into H.H. Holmes' murder house, and using that as leverage to get Lucy to help him. She in turn enlists the help of Harry Houdini, because who else are you going to get to help you get into a secure room? She rightfully surmises that he will eventually be able to help her turn the tables on Flynn, and they leave him chained to a desk in the hands of the Rittenhouse agents. Of course, he's able to escape, and we never see him again for the rest of the episode, but the action is fulfilled with Lucy and Houdini going to the murder house to rescue Wyatt and Rufus. So for the most part, aside from Lucy being rescued from Flynn, not much in the way of long-term development happened other than, again, we basically got a reset button. That is, until the episode's final few minutes. It's then when we get to see Rufus recording a message to his Rittenhouse handler saying that he's no longer going to record the missions and do what he's told, and they're just going to have to deal with it because he's the only available pilot, claiming some of his own leverage on Rittenhouse instead of Rittenhouse always putting leverage on him. Who knows how long that's actually going to hold. The second big development at the end was Wyatt getting a call from Flynn, who says he's going to fulfill his end of the bargain that he made with Wyatt during the Benedict Arnold episode, in which if Wyatt helped him find Benedict Arnold, he would tell him who had killed his wife. Although the mission didn't end the way Flynn wanted to, he says Wyatt held up his end of the bargain. So he tells him who his wife's killer is. Wes Gilliam, a man already in jail for life for other crimes. He reminds Wyatt that they can't travel back in time to any point in which they already exist, so there's no way for him to go back and kill this man. Suggesting an alternative that he could go back and kill the man's parents, or at least one of them, so he would never exist. Essentially killing an innocent person to stop a murderer, which is basically what Flynn's been doing all along. And it's obvious he's trying to get Wyatt to understand his point of view of why he's been doing all these horrible things, to save his family. And it's really this very brief conversation, more than anything else that happens in this episode, that I really want to talk about. As I already said, for the most part, all of the developments that we got in the Benedict Arnold episode have pretty much been reset here. Flynn's still the bad guy. He's still trying to piecemeal destroy Rittenhouse, and our heroes are trying to stop him. And as far as we can tell at this point, present day was not drastically changed by the death of Rittenhouse back in 1780. But I do want to talk briefly about Flynn and his relationship to our various heroes. As I said in my review of the previous episode, the show has been teasing that sooner or later Flynn may become an anti-hero rather than the antagonist. Even though we may not agree with his methods, we can understand why he would want to get rid of Rittenhouse. We've got enough evidence that Rittenhouse is a bad organization. And in the last episode, more so than in any other, our heroes seemed inclined to work with him. They were not working with him under threat or blackmail or extortion or threat to violence to others. They bought in. Now, the line they were not willing to cross was the murder of John, a child. And this ultimately ruined Flynn's plans, and he's very upset about that. He ends up kidnapping Lucy, and he blames her specifically for the failure. And most likely that kidnapping was enough to turn Rufus and Wyatt against him completely. But even if that wasn't the case, he ends up almost murdering them by tricking them to go into the murder house to gain leverage over Lucy. So really, any chance of them teaming up in the near future seems off the table. So that's just one more way that this episode sort of reset the status quo. Now, the other thing that was mentioned in the conversation between Flynn and Wyatt at the end was Flynn, for the first time, explicitly saying what the limitation on time travel is. He says that you cannot travel back to a point in time in which you already exist. Now, that's been implied, and I've mentioned it in previous episodes where that has created some confusion, especially when it comes to Anthony, because we've had at least 2 episodes in which they have traveled back in time to years in which the actor playing Anthony would have been alive, namely the space race and the Watergate tape. So if we're to take Flynn at his word that that is a hard and fast limitation, there's an inconsistency with time travel in this show. But for now, we're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out. If that is indeed a hard and fast rule, or something that they can break at risk of creating some kind of paradox that destroys the space-time continuum. I don't know. But it's something we definitely need to keep a lookout for, because seems to be the primary inconsistency with the rules of time travel as they've been defined in this show so far. But as far as the episode as a whole, as I said, the episode for the most part kind of left me a little disappointed, especially from a mythology standpoint, and the idea that it just did not live up to the promise of the cliffhanger and the Benedict Arnold episode. It just really feels like they've set a reset button to bide their time until we get to the season finale. That being said, as a standalone episode, this was indeed a very fun one. It had some good action and some good one-off characters. So if you've seen this episode, and as always I hope you did because I just spoiled the heck out of it, what did you think about it? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some other TV and movie reviews, and until next time, be careful which hotel you stay in.